Hi folks, a little while back we took a look at this book, Science Fiction 101 Best Novels from 1985 to 2010, so covering a 25-year period, and I had a look at which books I owned of that 101 and which ones I'd read, or how few of them I'd read actually, and then a look at the ones that I covet and don't yet have. I mentioned at the time that there was a preceding book that this one is modelled on, and that book is this one, Science Fiction, the 100 Best Novels, and that was published in 1985 and looks at the years 1949 to 1984. And I was curious in the same way that I was with the other books, how many of them I own, how many of them I have read, and how many of them I yet to get. So this book is structured similarly to the other one, and that's not surprising because the other one's borrowed this one's structure. So this order is listed in order of publication. There's no attempt to declare a best book. The author, David Pringle, states at the beginning that not all of the choices will be universally agreed with. Some of them will be controversial, and he's aiming to stimulate debate, really. And the foreword by Michael Moorcock demonstrates that ably, because he wildly disagrees with quite a lot of the choices. But Michael Moorcock gives Pringle some relief by saying that he imagines that everyone would probably agree with about half of what's on the list, and then the rest is up for debate. As is right and proper, as I said the last time, this is entirely subjective. Some things will float people's boats and other things won't, and people will have completely different and contrasting views and perspectives depending on where they've come from, what kind of thing they like, and so on and so forth. And that's entirely right and proper and to be welcomed. I think it would be a very boring place if we all liked and valued the same things. The first book, I fall at the first hurdle. The first book is 1984 by George Orwell, and I thought, well, that's no problem. I must have a copy of that in the house, surely. I don't, or at least if I do, I can't find it. It's not on my shelves. I thought we might have a copy downstairs, but no, I can't find it. I have read it though, so that's one to the credit. Several times, in fact. The next one on the list is George Stewart's Earth Abides from 1949, and I have read this one. And if you thought COVID was bad, this one is post-pandemic, or flu, where that has wiped out 99% of the world's population, maybe even more. And the protagonist kind of wanders across the US before eventually finding and falling in love and making a family with a woman, and the rest of the book tracks their progress as they're sort of the trappings of modern society deteriorate and they're reduced to being hunter-gatherers and opines on whether that's a good or a bad thing. I found it actually pretty tragic towards the end, and it hit me in the feels. Really good book and very, very nicely written. The next book is The Martian Chronicles by Ray Bradbury, or The Silver Locusts. It was published originally here in the UK. And this is a loosely connected set of short stories, really. They together form a narrative, but they were published originally as short stories. I have not read this. Another one that I haven't read but do possess is the next one on the list, and this one's from 1951, Robert A. Heinlein's The Puppet Masters, in this rather nice pan lozenge. I haven't read it. In fact, my confession to you right now is that I've actually only read one Robert Heinlein book that I recall, and that was Starship Troopers, so I've got quite a lot of his back catalogue on my shelves, and I really must get round to reading them. The next book on the list is John Wyndham's Day of the Triffids, and I have read this several times. And this is the tale of a double catastrophe. There's a cosmic event that turns everyone blind pretty much overnight, or nearly everybody, leaving the few sightless to try to cope. And then the place is overrun by Triffids, which were previously farmed for their oil. And these Triffids can give you a nasty sting and can kill a man with a kind of whip-like stinger that can batter them. It is a tale of who gets to survive and who doesn't, and the protagonist and his partner are good fun and very relatable people, and I recently reread it and really enjoyed it. The next book on the list I don't have. It's Limbo by Bernard Wolfe. I don't have a copy of that. But the next one I do have a copy of, and I have read a couple of times, The Demolished Man by Alfred. In fact, this was one of the earliest science fiction books that I read in the early 80s, aged 10 or 11. And this, I think I'm right in saying, is a UK first edition paperback, and very nice it is too. The front cover is in pretty nice condition, but the spine is a bit creased. So that's another one in the credit column. And the next book I've also read is Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451. It was some years ago, and beyond the basic plot outline, I don't remember a great deal about it. I should reread it. Next book I read last year actually is Childhood's End by Arthur C. Clarke. I thought this was actually dull as dishwater, and whilst there were some nice ideas in it, the plot and the characterizations were lacking severely, and I thought that the sort of so-called big reveals were sort of a little bit risible, really. Didn't get on with it at all, but still, I have it and I have read it. The next book on the list is 1953's The Paradox Men by Charles Harness, which I clearly have, but I haven't read. I hear good things about it. I'd like to read it. The next book on the list is 1953's Bring the Jubilee by Ward Moore, one of only a few science fiction books that he wrote. I have read this. I read it earlier in the year and I really loved it. His writing is beautiful. It's a shame he didn't write more. And this is a alternate history with a bit of cheeky time travel thrown in towards the very end, and it's set in a world in which the Confederates won the Civil War and what's left of the Union is reduced to a rump, and New York is a sort of backwater kind of run down city, and the protagonist is a smart guy. He ends up going to a sort of pseudo university. I really enjoyed it, and I would love to read more of his work. The very next book on the list is also from 1953. It's The Space Merchants by Frederick Pohl and C.M. Kornbluth. I have it, clearly, but I haven't read it. Another one from 1953, which I have read, is Clifford Simak's Ring Around the Sun. This is a tale of sort of parallel worlds. That sequence going forwards and back around the sun is the ring of which the title speaks. Next one is More Than Human by Theodore Sturgeon. I have it, but I haven't read it. The next book, Hal Clement's Mission of Gravity from 1954, and again, I haven't read it. I should, because it's a thin book and I would get through it in an afternoon probably. I haven't read it. After that, we've got The End of Eternity from, of course, Isaac Asimov from 1955. I have it, but I haven't read it. At least I don't think I have. I'm pretty sure I haven't read it. I've read quite a lot of Asimov stuff, but this one escaped me when I was a youth, and I haven't caught up with it yet. The next one on the list is 1955's The Long Tomorrow by Lee Brackett, which I have read and enjoyed very, very much. It was my first Lee Brackett, and her writing is just fantastic. You immediately know that you're in good hands. And this is set a couple of hundred years after nuclear wars devastated the cities. And what we're left with are the people that were able to thrive in the agrarian society that inevitably followed. And they are the Mennonites, kind of like the Amish. And it's a pretty austere, pretty religious society. And the cousins that are the protagonists try to break free. They pursue clues to the existence of a fabled city that still exists somewhere in the countryside, in which technology still exists. And they are drawn to that, and they get on various adventures as they find their way there. The next book is The Stars, My Destination by Alfred Bester, which in the UK was originally published as Tiger, although the title was later changed to match the one in the US. And this is a copy dated from the 1960s, if I remember rightly. Yeah, it must be. It's priced in shillings and pence. I have read this, and in fact quite recently, earlier this year, and I really enjoyed it. I probably enjoyed The Demolished Man a little bit more, but still pretty good stuff. Sort of continuing a theme with Arthur C. Clarke, really. The next book on the list is The City and the Stars, which again I thought was really boring, dragged on, felt like a short story that had been exploded into a novel unnecessarily. The next book I was absolutely certain I had on my shelves, but again, like in 1984, I just can't find it, so perhaps I don't after all. I maybe imagined it. But that is Robert Heinlein's 1957 book, The Door into Summer. Just haven't got it. I've got lots of his books, as I say, and plenty of them I haven't read, but I do not have that one. The next book is 1957's The Midwich Cuckoos, by John Wyndham, which I have read. I actually read it for the first time earlier this year. For me, this is kind of a mid-tier John Wyndham, but still very good. It's like a slow-motion alien invasion. The next one on the list is 1958's Non-Stop, which is Brian Aldiss' first book here in the Pan Lozenge. I haven't read it, but it's a generation ship story, and I would like to read it. Next is 1958's A Case of Conscience by James Blish. I have read it. I loved the first half and found the second half deeply, deeply tedious, and I kind of sort of soft DNF'd it. I got about 85% through, and then eventually decided I couldn't be bothered to read the rest. Went to the Wikipedia page to find out what happened, and decided that was good enough. So I would very much like to have continued on the alien planet where we start. I enjoyed the descriptions there, and I enjoyed learning more about the alien society, and I couldn't give a shit about the second half, which was on Earth, which was just boring. David Pringle seems to appreciate Robert Heinlein as a third Robert Heinlein, and this one I do have. Have Spacesuit Will Travel. I think if I remember right, this is one of his so-called juveniles aimed at sort of younger readers, but perfectly okay for adults to read too. I have not read it. I would like to. Next on the list is 1959's Time Out of Joint, the first of several dicks in this book. I haven't read this one. The next book on here is a sort of end-of-the-world tale, Alas Babylon, post-nuclear war conflict, which is pretty common stuff in the 1950s. That was obviously a big fear for people at the time. I don't have it, but I would like to get a copy. I'm talking of post-nuclear. Here we go again. A Canticle for Leibowitz is the next book on the list. This is also from 1959, and I have read this. The next on the list, also from 1959, is Sirens of Titan by Kurt Vonnegut. And I read this earlier in the year, and I absolutely hated it. Couldn't get on with it at all. I thought it was entirely pointless. I didn't get on with the slightly sort of absurdist sense of humour, and the plot jumped around all over the place. It did sort of pay off at the end, but not sufficiently well to justify the preceding kind of 90% of the book. Didn't like it, and I'm not in a hurry to read any more of his books, which is probably a shame. The next book is 1960's Rogue Moon by Aldous Budrys, which is about a labyrinth that's discovered on the moon, a little bit akin to the monolith in Arthur C. Clarke's 2001 A Space Odyssey. But this labyrinth is a bit different. If you enter, you'll get confused and die, and then they send people in again and again and again, who unravel a little bit more of the labyrinth inside but still die. And they arrive at the device of sending doppelgangers, people's clones, into the labyrinth. And the problem is that the original can experience everything that the doppelganger does, and it drives them all insane. I gather. I haven't actually read it. The next book's another Theodore Sturgeon, Venus Plus X, which I don't have. I will, like I did for the last one, I will put a list of all of these books in the description for the video. I will also put them in a spreadsheet, and if you would like a copy of that, you can drop me an email, which is in my channel page or in any of the other video descriptions. There won't be room for it on this one, I don't think. The next book is 1962's Hot House, which I have read. It's a little bit of a fix-up. I think if I remember rightly, there are 5 short stories that make up the novel. Obviously, there's kind of glued together. And 2 or 3 of the sections I thought were just absolutely top-notch, beautiful writing, very evocative descriptions of a far, far, far future world that's very different to our own. And the rest of it were a little bit nonsensical and didn't quite fit, to my mind. Not bad or anything, but just not as excellent as the other 2. So on average, you get what's a pretty good book. It's definitely worth a read. The next 2 on the list I don't have. The first is J.G. Ballard's The Drowned World. Again, I thought I had it, but I don't. I've got several of his other catastrophe books, but not that one. And then after that, another book that I ought to have but don't is Anthony Burgess's A Clockwork Orange. The next book is The Man in the High Castle by Philip K. Dick. And if I am to read more Philip K. Dick, I think this is where I would start, either here or possibly with some of his short stories. But I think of the 2, probably I would lean towards this one. The next book on the list is Robert Sheckley's Journey Beyond Tomorrow, which I haven't read. In fact, I haven't read any of Robert Sheckley's books, so he's in good company. The next one on the list is Clifford Simak's Way Station from 1963. I have it, but I haven't read it. I've only read one Clifford Simak book, and that was that Ring Around the Sun. I've got about 20 of them, and I need to get stuck in, as I did enjoy his writing. And this obviously is a classic that I ought to have read by now. Next one, back to the esteemed Mr. Vonnegut, somebody who I'm not in a hurry to revisit, as I said. Cat's Cradle, which a lot of people say is the book I maybe ought to read of his next, if I can summon the enthusiasm to do so. It is at least slender, so it should be a quick read. Next is 1964's Greybeard by Brian Aldiss, which I have read, although it was several years ago. And this is a sort of post, it's a little bit like Children of Men, due to atomic testing in the atmosphere or in space or something, we've somehow all become sterilized. And this is a story of kind of elderly people. And we're decades on from that. There have been no children. And so the protagonist is an elderly guy, the greybeard of the tale. And he and his wife decide to make a journey by river, exploring as they go the societies that have sprung up along the river. The next book on the list is one that I don't have. It's William Burroughs' Nova Express. And after that, we've got Martian Timeslip by Philip K. Dick, which I have read, and it was okay. It was all right. You know, I quite enjoyed it. It's got quite an interesting take on autism as both a curse and a gift. Probably quite an unusual representation in a novel from the 1960s. We talk about autism kind of quite widely now, but I think that was pretty unusual back in the day. The next one is also Philip K. Dick, The 3 Stigmata of Palmer Eldritch, which again, I have in fact read. And again, it was all right. I wasn't blown away by either of them. I hear lots of people raving about Philip K. Dick's writing, and it just doesn't really work all that well for me. It's all right. I just feel like I'm damning him with faint praise now. Again, I've got lots of his books, and I will get to them eventually, probably. The next book is The Wanderer by Fritz Lieber, which I haven't read, but I am strangely attracted to for reasons which I can't imagine. Nothing to do with the cover. And that is about a planet which appears in our solar system, and some visiting alien cat ladies that are the bosses of the piece. The next book is one that I'm really keen to read. It's in Australia by Cordwainer Smith. I have not read it. The next one is also by Philip K. Dick. David Pringle seems to be a big fan of Philip K. Dick. And this one is Dr. Blood Money, and I do not have a copy of it. The next book's pretty obscure. You probably won't have heard of it. That's Dune by Frank Herbert, which I gather is about a desert. I've never read it. All right, I have read it several times, and it's one of my favourite books. Dune by Frank Herbert. I surely don't need to tell you anything about this. The next one is The Crystal World by J.G. Ballard. Again, I haven't read it. There are several Ballards to come in this list. And based on my one interaction with him, as I've said many times, which was Crash, I am not in a great hurry. As it happens, this book is on my October TBR. Possibly by the time this video arrives, I will in fact have read it. We shall see. Next one is Make Room by Harry Harrison, and I have read this one. This is a kind of cautionary tale about overpopulation, and not the last in this list either. I have read it. It was pretty good. It was my introduction to Harry Harrison. I haven't read anything else by him. The next one is Flowers for Algernon by Daniel Keyes, which I read last year, and it's a good one. It's a bit of a tugger at the heartstrings, and it asks the question, what if we could make somebody super intelligent, and what would happen if it didn't last? So the protagonist goes through a sort of parabolic curve of his intelligence increasing dramatically, far outweighing any of the sort of nerdy scientists that were running the trial that he's on. And then it comes back down the other side, and it's quite poignant, tracking his reversal. Right, I'm not sure what the running total is at this point, but we're doing not bad so far, I think. I think better, anyway, from a proportion point of view than the later list, the Broderick and De Filippo list that we looked at a couple of weeks ago. However, I think the wheels are going to come off with the rest of the list. I've got less of them, and I've read even less of them. The next book is by Roger Zelazny from 1966, The Dream Master, which I don't have a copy of. The next one I do have, but haven't read. And again, this is the other overpopulation cautionary tale. It follows an ensemble cast of characters that give some insights into what life's like in this world. The next is 1968's Nova by Samuel Delany, which I haven't read. After that, we have 1968's Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, which of course the movie Blade Runner was based upon, by Philip K. Dick, none other. I haven't read it, surprisingly. I do enjoy Blade Runner. It's one of my favourite movies, but I haven't read the book. And this, along with The Man in the High Castle, might be one of the next PKDs that I tackle. And then there's 5 or 6 that I just don't have. We've got a Thomas Dish, Camp Concentration from 1968, The Final Programme by Michael Moorcock, 1968, Pavane by Keith Roberts, not again 1968, Heroes and Villains by Angela Carter from 69, and surprisingly, The Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula Le Guin from 1969. I, again, was convinced I have it, but I don't, and I haven't read it either. And then we've got The Palace of Eternity by Bob Shaw from 1969, which I also don't have and haven't read. The next one on the list is Bugjack Baron from 1969 by Norman Spinrad, of course. And I don't know a great deal about this book. I picked this up in a charity shop for $1.99, ridiculously. It's a first edition hardback. It's in perfect condition. So I was very happy to find it. I didn't know anything about it then either. The next one is Tau Zero by Paul Anderson. I have read this. I read it either early this year or late last year. It's a time dilation gig. The starship that they're on can't stop accelerating. That gives the crew various problems. And actually, this was one of the top 10 books from the 1970s that I featured in a video recently. Next, there's another 4 or 5 that I don't have. There's Downward to Earth by Robert Silverberg, The Year of the Quiet Sun by Wilson Tucker, 334 by Thomas Dish. And then there's 1972's The Fifth Head of Cerberus by, of course, Gene Wolfe, with this fantastic Bruce Pennington cover, which I have not read. And then there's The Dancers at the End of Time by Michael Moorcock, which, again, I don't have. Then we've got Crash by J.G. Ballard, my one and only J.G. Ballard experience. I have read it, hated it. No redeeming features at all. I'm never going to reread it. I don't know why I've even got it on my shelves, just for the sake of completeness or to remind me or something. I recognise his importance as a writer, but I think this was a bad place for me to start. And then there's 2 or 3 that I don't have. There's Looking Backwards from the Year 2000 by Mac Reynolds, and then The Embedding by Ian Watson. And then another one, Walk to the End of the World by Susie McKee Charnas from 1974. Don't have it. We've got M. John Harrison's The Centauri Device from 1974, which was actually M. John Harrison's attempt to kill the space opera, but in fact was mostly lapped up as a straight but unusually well-written space opera. I read it earlier this year maybe, or late last year, I forget, and I didn't really get on with it. I found the prose a little bit too chewy. I think he was being too clever for his own good. He himself kind of doesn't like the book now, and I'm not sure why. I'm not sure if that's because of the writing or because of the subject matter or what. It's like an anti-space opera. It's the hero is kind of an anti-hero. He's a bit grungy and a bit morally lacking, let's say. He's not your typical space opera hero, that's for sure. In fact, in an E. Doc Smith space opera from the 30s, he probably would have been a baddie. The next one, which I have read and quite recently, is The Dispossessed by Ursula Le Guin. It's a tale of 2 worlds close by. One is the moon of the other. One is an anarcho-syndicalist society where everything's a bit austere, but it functions and people are generally happy. And then another, a bit more like ours, a bit more materialistic, a bit more capitalist. And things are a little bit more dysfunctional, but it is more powerful and richer. And there's a scientist flitting between the two, trying to tout his latest research. And really the book exists to make the contrast between the societies. The next one in the list is Inverted World by a certain Mr. Christopher Priest. I have read it, very much enjoyed it last year. And this is a topsy-turvy world in which the physics doesn't work the way what it ought to. And there are reasons for that which are not clear to the inhabitants of the city of Earth, which they must move on rail tracks. It's a little bit bizarre, but the prose is very well written and the protagonist is very likable. And we get to witness his kind of revelation at the end of the book, which doesn't quite comprehend or understand. The next one in the list is High Rise by J.G. Ballard. I haven't read it. I have seen the movie, but that doesn't count. The next one is a Barry Malzberg, which I haven't read. I haven't read any of his books, actually. And the book is, The book is Galaxies from 1975. And then another book, scandalously, that I haven't read, and I don't think I have a copy of, is The Female Man by Joanna Russ, a seminal feminist work of the mid-70s. The next one I have read is Orbitsville by Bob Shaw, which is a sort of big dumb object story in the style of Ringworld by Larry Niven, which is, I would argue, a strange omission from this book. And I don't know why they've picked this one over Ringworld, to be honest. I did enjoy it, and this one is about the interior of a Dyson sphere and an enormous trek, which they must make for reasons which become apparent when you read it. I enjoyed it, pretty good. It was my first Bob Shaw... Was it my first Bob Shaw novel? No, Ship of Strangers was my first Bob Shaw novel, but that was a kind of a fix-up, or if it wasn't a fix-up, it was written like it was a fix-up, and this is a proper novel. Then there's a couple that I don't have. There's Kingsley Amis, The Alteration, and Woman on the Edge of Time by Marge Piercy. I don't have either. Then we've got Man Plus by Frederick Pohl, which I have read that earlier this year, and I enjoyed it. It's a story of a kind of the sort of harrowing creation of a being from human raw material that could survive unaided on the surface of Mars because the planet Earth is going down the pan. And then there's another 6 or 7 that I don't have, and I'm not going to read them out to you. You can check them out on the list that I'll put in the description. The next one that I do have is Timescape by Gregory Benford, which I have read and enjoyed. It's quite sciencey, and it's set in 2 timelines. One in the 1960s in California, and another in, I forget when exactly, the 1990s maybe, something like that. The future from the point of view of when he wrote the book. And in the future, climate change is resulting in crop failures and death and disease on a widespread basis. And there's a desperate attempt to send a message back to the past to try to get them to mend their ways to save the future. And then the 60s setting is in a science campus at university, and the professor there trying to interpret the anomalies in his experiment, the noise in his experiment, and eventually realizes that it is a message. And then he has a devil of a time trying to explain to everyone why the hell he's getting a message and who it could possibly be from. A pretty good book. I really enjoyed it. And I thought that actually the timeline, the part of the tale in England was pretty well done for a guy that's actually American. And then there's a few more that I'm missing. And then the next one they list, along with its sequel, is Roderick by John Sladek. I haven't read it. I gather you could argue that Sladek is like a influence or precursor to things like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. It's a satire meant to be sort of acerbic wit, a bit Vonnegut-esque, which doesn't fill me with joy, I must say. But never mind. I have it. I haven't read it. The next one, which I do have, is The Book of the New Sun by Gene Wolfe, and I have read it, and its counterpart as well. This is books 1 and 2, and then 3 and 4 are in a separate omnibus edition, which I also have and have read. Then there's a Philip Jose Farmer that I don't have, and then we're into Oath of Fealty by Niven and Pornell, The Masters of Disaster. I've read quite a few of their books, but I have not read this one. Then there's a Michael Bishop that I don't have, and a John Batchelor that I don't have. And the last book in the list is Neuromancer by William Gibson from 1984, which has become synonymous with the term cyberpunk. Probably wasn't the first, but it's certainly the most famous and renowned of the cyberpunk books. I haven't read it, but I should. I've read Burning Chrome, which is some of the stories of which are set in the same world as Neuromancer, but I haven't read it. So what are the scores on the doors? How did I do? A bit better, I think, than the other list. I've got and have read more of this one. From a quick scan of the contents page, the books in here that I don't have, I wouldn't mind seeking out and getting on my shelves to be read at some point. Probably the priorities for me are The Death of Grass by John Christopher, which I hear is excellent. I do like a good end-of-the-world tale. Alas, Babylon, along the same lines, I'd like to get. Nova by Samuel Delaney, that rare beast, a standalone space opera and in his slightly quirky style. I have read Babel 17 by him, which I enjoyed. So if Nova isn't too far removed from that, from a style point of view, I should get on with it pretty well. Purveyne by Keith Roberts, I'd really like to read that. I have a few of his books. I've read one, The Furies, which I really enjoyed. Left Hand of Darkness, as I mentioned, I can't believe I don't have it. I would like to get it and read it. Downward to the Earth by Silverberg. I can't believe I didn't have a copy of it. I've got a lot of Silverberg books, but I haven't got it. And I thought I had, but I've scoured my shelves and I can't find it. So I absolutely should get that. There's a Thomas Dish here, 334, which I'd really like to read. And the Offahuchi Hotline by John Varley. I think that was his first novel. Again, I quite like John Varley. I've read a few of his things and I would like to read that too. And the other one that I'll mention now, and I'm sure I'll gradually acquire the rest as well, is Juniper Time by Kate Wilhelm, which David Pringle argues is even better than Where Late the Sweetbird Sang, which is the one that she's most famous for. So how many of these do you have on your shelves and how many of them have you read? Did you do better than me, or have we both got a lot of reading to do? As always, thank you for watching, and until next time, goodbye for now.